Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today we are looking at one of the most exciting areas of British coin collecting, the United Kingdom 50 pence coin. If you have old 50p coins sitting in a drawer, a collection, a coin jar, or even in your spare change, you may want to look carefully before spending them, because certain dates and designs can be considerably more desirable to collectors than ordinary examples. The 50p has an incredible history, beginning in 1969 when it was introduced as part of Britain's transition toward decimal currency. It was a revolutionary coin at the time because of its distinctive seven-sided shape, and over the decades it has carried everything from historic national events to famous characters, sporting occasions, wildlife and royal celebrations. The Royal Mint describes the 50p as the UK's most collected coin, with more than 100 different designs having entered circulation. Today, we are counting down 5 particularly interesting and valuable United Kingdom 50p coins, looking at their different years, conditions, rarity, collector demand, and potential market value. Get started. First up, the United Kingdom 1977 50 new pence coin, especially an example that is in dirty, circulated, or heavily handled condition. At first glance, a worn and dirty 50p coin might look like nothing more than ordinary pocket change, but older British coins can still attract collectors because of their age, historical importance, distinctive design, and place in the development of modern UK coinage. The 1977 50 new pence is particularly interesting because it belongs to the original large-size 50p series introduced decades before the smaller 50p coins that people recognise today. So, if you have one of these coins sitting in an old collection, box, drawer, or jar, stay with us because we are going to examine its history, design, rarity, collector demand, realistic dollar value, and the features that could make an individual example more interesting to collectors. The United Kingdom introduced the decimal 50p coin in 1969. And the original 50p was much larger than the modern version. The Royal Mint explains that the coin's distinctive seven-sided shape was revolutionary because its constant breadth made it easy to identify by both sight and touch and suitable for vending machines. The early 50p design featured Britannia seated beside a lion, with a shield, trident, and olive branch, while the words New Pence appeared above the denomination. The 1977 coin therefore represents an important period in British decimal history and was produced during the reign of Queen Elizabeth II. The year 1977 is also historically significant because it was the year of Queen Elizabeth II's Silver Jubilee, celebrating 25 years of her reign. Although collectors should not automatically assume that every 1977 50p is a rare Silver Jubilee issue, the year itself gives the coin additional historical interest. The 1977 Britannia 50p remained part of the large-format decimal coinage that Britain used before the later redesign and reduction in size. This makes the coin an excellent example of how British circulating money changed over time. The Royal Mint states that the original large 50p introduced in 1969 remained in circulation until the smaller 50p was introduced in 1997, with a larger type eventually demonetized in 1998. One of the most recognizable characteristics of the 1977 50 new pence is its seven-sided shape. Unlike conventional round coins, the original British 50p has 7 curved sides, creating the famous equilateral curve heptagon appearance. This unusual shape immediately makes the coin stand out among other British denominations. The reverse features Britannia seated beside a lion, holding a trident and olive branch, with a shield beside her. The denomination 50 appears below Britannia, while New Pence is positioned above the main design. The design was created by Christopher Ironside and was used on the original 50p series from 1969 through 1982. Another important feature is the coin size and metal composition. The 1977 large 50p is made from cupronickel, an alloy commonly used for British circulating coins. Contemporary examples can show considerable changes in appearance after decades of circulation. A coin that was once bright and sharply struck may now have dark areas, dirt, surface marks, scratches, or general discoloration. For collectors, however, these signs of age can also tell a story. A dirty coin is not automatically rare, but its historical age and recognizable design can make it an enjoyable addition to a British decimal collection. Now let's discuss one of the most important questions. How rare is the 1977 50p when it is dirty or damaged? The answer requires a little caution. The 1977 issue was produced in substantial quantities, and published references give different mintage figures depending on how the issue is classified. Coin Hunter lists approximately 49,536,000 coins, while another British coin reference gives approximately 49,729,800. PCGS's regular strike listing records a 4.8 million mintage for the specific issue represented in its database. These differences show why collectors should identify the exact variety and source before making a valuation claim. Because the coin was made in considerable numbers, An ordinary dirty circulated example should not automatically be described as an extremely rare coin worth thousands or millions of dollars. In fact, condition is especially important here. Heavy dirt, scratches, corrosion, cleaning marks, dents, and other damage normally reduce the appeal of a standard circulating coin rather than increase it. The real opportunity for a collector comes from finding something unusual, such as a genuine minting error, an unusual striking characteristic, an exceptionally well-preserved example, or a variety that has been properly identified and authenticated. That said, age and historical character still create collector interest. Many collectors enjoy building complete date runs of British 50p coins, and a 1977 example can be an attractive representative of the original large-size Britannia series. A dirty coin may therefore have more appeal to a beginner, date-set collector, or British decimal enthusiast than its face value alone suggests. The key is understanding the difference between collectible and rare. A coin can be collectible without being genuinely scarce, and that distinction is extremely important when discussing auction values. So, what could a 1977 United Kingdom 50 new pence actually be worth in dollars? For an ordinary dirty or circulated example with no major mint error, expectations should remain realistic. British coin price references indicate that circulated examples of common decimal coins can remain around face value, while better uncirculated and proof examples can bring more. One current reference lists the 1977 50p at around £1 to £2 in some uncirculated grades, with considerably higher figures for certain proof grades. For a typical dirty circulated coin, a realistic market range may therefore be around 50 cents to $2, depending on the buyer, condition, exact variety, and selling venue. A cleaner, attractive circulated example might receive more interest from a collector, while a genuinely high-grade example can command a premium. PCGS reports an auction record of $44.99 for a certified NGC MS67 example sold through eBay in October 2022. That result is a useful reminder that condition can dramatically change the market, but it should not be confused with the value of an ordinary dirty coin. The most important lesson is that online asking prices are not the same as completed sales. A seller can list an ordinary 1977 50p for hundreds or even thousands of dollars, but that does not mean collectors are actually paying those prices. When researching your own coin, concentrate on genuine completed auction results, reputable coin dealers, certified examples, and clearly documented sales. A dramatic internet listing may attract attention, but the real market value is determined by what knowledgeable buyers are actually willing to pay. If you own a 1977 50p in dirty condition, the first piece of advice is simple: do not clean it aggressively. Scrubbing, polishing, abrasive materials, or harsh chemicals can permanently damage the original surface and leave obvious cleaning marks. Even if the coin looks unattractive, its original surface may be more desirable to a collector than a shiny but artificially cleaned appearance. Instead, handle the coin carefully by its edges and keep it in a suitable protective holder. Next, inspect both sides under good lighting. Look closely at the date, lettering, Britannia's design, the denomination, the edge, and the overall shape. Search for anything genuinely unusual rather than simply assuming that dark coloration or dirt represents an error. If you notice a possible minting error, compare the coin with trusted references or consider getting an expert opinion. Authentication can become particularly important if someone claims that an ordinary 1977 coin is worth a very large amount of money. Condition is also worth recording. A coin with heavy circulation marks, scratches, dents, and dirt will generally have considerably less value than a sharply detailed example with attractive original surfaces. If your coin is unusually well preserved, place it separately from heavily circulated examples. Over time, building a date and condition collection can become a rewarding way to appreciate British decimal coinage. In conclusion, the 1977 United Kingdom 50 new pence is a fascinating piece of British monetary history. Its seven-sided shape, Britannia design, large original format, Queen Elizabeth II portrait, and connection to the early decades of decimal currency make it a memorable coin for collectors. The coin is old enough to have genuine historical interest, but its relatively substantial production means that an ordinary dirty or damaged example should not automatically be treated as an ultra-rare treasure. Published mintage figures themselves vary by classification, reinforcing the importance of identifying the exact issue before making a major valuation claim. For a typical dirty circulated example, the value is generally modest, often around face value or a small premium, while much better preserved, certified, proof, or genuinely error varieties can attract significantly more attention. The documented PCGS auction record of $44.99 for a high-grade MS67 example demonstrates the difference between an ordinary circulated coin and a professionally graded top-condition specimen. So before you spend, sell, or throw away that old 1977 50p, take a second look. Check the date, examine the design, study the condition, and most importantly, look for genuine varieties or minting errors. Sometimes the greatest value of an old coin is not simply its price tag, but the history it carries and the story it tells about Britain's transition into the decimal age. Next up, the United Kingdom 50 new pence coin dated 1978, specifically a coin in fine condition. At first glance, this old seven-sided coin may look like an ordinary piece of change from decades ago, but coins from the early years of British decimalisation continue to attract collectors because they represent an important period in the history of British money. The 1978 50 new pence is especially interesting because it belongs to the original large-size 50p series, a design that became one of the most recognisable shapes in British coinage. The Royal Mint explains that the 50p was first introduced in 1969 and was the world's first seven-sided equilateral curved coin. So, if you have a 1978 example sitting in an old collection, coin jar, box, or inherited group of British coins, stay with us because we are going to examine its history, design, rarity, collector demand, condition, and realistic auction market value in US dollars. The 50p coin has a very important place in Britain's transition to decimal currency. It was introduced in 1969 as part of the preparations for decimalisation, replacing the 10-shilling note. The unusual seven-sided shape was not chosen simply for appearance. Its constant breadth made it easy to recognise by touch and sight and practical for use in vending machines. By 1978, the 50p was already an established part of everyday British commerce. The coin carried the denomination 50 new pence, reflecting the terminology used during this early period of decimal coinage. The 1978 issue belongs to the large 50p format that remained in use for many years before the smaller 50p was introduced in 1997. The Royal Mint states that the original large 50p was introduced in 1969 and was eventually demonetised in 1998. This makes the 1978 coin a genuine survivor from the early era of Britain's decimal currency system. One of the most attractive features of the 1978 50 new pence is its classic Britannia reverse design, created by Christopher Ironside. Britannia is shown seated beside a lion, holding a trident and olive branch, with a shield beside her. The denomination 50 appears below, while the words new pence appear above. On the obverse is the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II used on the coinage of the period. The combination of the young Queen's portrait, the distinctive seven-sided shape, and the traditional Britannia design gives this coin a strong historical identity. The coin was struck in copper nickel, and its large original format makes it immediately different from the smaller 50p coins that many people know today. For collectors, these physical characteristics are important because they help identify the coin as part of Britain's first-generation 50p series. Now let's talk about rarity, because this is where collectors need to separate genuine scarcity from exaggerated claims. The 1978 50p is an old coin, but it is not an extremely rare date. PCGS records a mintage of approximately 72,005,000 pieces, meaning a substantial number were produced. Therefore, simply owning a 1978 example does not automatically make it a high-value rarity. However, that does not make the coin uninteresting. Collectors of British decimal coinage often want representative examples from the early 50p series, and attractive, well-preserved pieces can be more desirable than heavily worn examples. A fine-condition coin can still have strong historical and collecting appeal because it preserves much of the original design while showing the signs of genuine circulation. If your coin is dirty, scratched, heavily worn, or damaged, its value will generally be lower than that of a well-preserved example. On the other hand, unusual minting errors, varieties, or exceptionally high-grade certified examples can attract additional attention, but such features must be verified carefully rather than assumed from normal circulation marks. So, what could a 1978 United Kingdom 50 new pence actually be worth in today's collector market? This is one of the most important questions, and the answer depends heavily on condition, authenticity, demand, and whether the coin has an unusual variety or error. Because the 1978 issue had a large mintage, an ordinary circulated example should not normally be described as a coin worth hundreds or thousands of dollars. For a typical fine condition example, a realistic collector market expectation is generally around 50 cents to $2, with especially attractive pieces potentially bringing somewhat more depending on the buyer and venue. Heavily worn or damaged examples may trade close to their basic collectible value, while sharply preserved uncirculated or professionally graded coins can command premiums. It is also important to remember that an online seller's asking price is not the same thing as an auction result. A coin listed for $100 does not mean collectors are actually paying $100 for it. Genuine completed sales and auction records are much more useful when estimating market value. The large mintage recorded by PCGS is a major reason why the ordinary 1978 coin should be approached as a collectible historical piece rather than an ultra-rare jackpot coin. If you own a 1978 50 new pence, the first thing you should do is carefully inspect both sides under good lighting. Look at the date, Queen Elizabeth II portrait, the Britannia reverse, the lettering, the edge, and the overall shape. Check for unusual doubling, missing details, abnormal metal appearance, striking problems, or other genuine minting characteristics. However, be careful not to confuse damage with an error. Scratches, dents, discoloration, corrosion, and cleaning marks usually reduce desirability rather than increase it. Avoid aggressively polishing or cleaning the coin because collectors generally prefer original surfaces. Instead, store the coin in a suitable non-damaging holder and keep it away from moisture and harsh chemicals. If you believe your coin has an unusual error or is an exceptionally high grade, consider getting a professional opinion before spending money on certification. Most importantly, compare your coin with sold examples rather than relying on dramatic asking prices found online. And there we have it, the 1978 United Kingdom 50 new pence, a fascinating survivor from the early years of British decimalisation. Although its large mintage means that an ordinary example is not an ultra-rare coin worth a fortune, it remains an important piece of British numismatic history. Its famous seven-sided shape, classic Britannia design. Next up, the United Kingdom 1969 50 new pence coin, particularly an example in circulated condition. At first glance, this large seven-sided coin might look like an ordinary old piece of change, but the 1969 date gives it an important place in British coinage history. This was the very first 50 pence coin introduced into UK circulation, making it a fascinating coin for collectors and anyone interested in the story of Britain's transition toward decimal currency. The Royal Mint confirms that the 50p was first introduced in 1969 as part of the preparations for decimalisation. Now, before we talk about value, it is important to understand that age alone does not automatically make a coin rare or extremely expensive. The 1969 issue had a very large production, so an ordinary circulated example generally has modest market value. However, its historical importance, attractive design, condition, and any unusual minting characteristics can make it an interesting addition to a collection. The story of the 1969 50 new pence begins during Britain's preparation for decimalisation, which officially took place in 1971. The new 50p was introduced in October 1969, giving the public time to become familiar with the new decimal coinage. It was designed to replace the 10-shilling note, and the Royal Mint explains that a durable coin was considered preferable because coins could remain useful in circulation for many years. The 1969 coin therefore represents much more than its face value. It is part of the transition between Britain's traditional pounds, shillings, and pence system and the modern decimal system. When you hold one today, you are holding a coin connected directly with one of the biggest changes in British monetary history. The original large 50p remained in circulation for decades before the smaller 50p was introduced in 1997, and the original large-sized version was demonetised in 1998. That long history is one reason collectors continue to appreciate these early 50p coins. One of the most immediately recognizable characteristics of the 1969 50 new pence is its unusual seven-sided shape. The Royal Mint describes the original 50p as an equilateral curve heptagon, and it was an innovative design intended to make the coin easily distinguishable from round denominations by both sight and touch. The reverse features Britannia seated beside a lion, holding a trident and olive branch, with a shield beside her. The denomination 50 appears below Britannia, while the words new pence appear above. The design was created by Christopher Ironside. On the obverse is the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II used on these early decimal issues. The combination of the young Queen's portrait, the large heptagonal shape, the Britannia design and the words new pence makes this coin especially recognizable to collectors. The coin was struck in cupronickel and the original large version measured approximately 30 mm across and weighed about 13.5 grams according to specialist coin references. Now let's discuss the most important question: is the 1969 50 new pence actually rare? The answer requires a little care. Although the 1969 date is historically significant, the standard issue was produced in a very large quantity. PCGS lists the mintage at approximately 188.4 million pieces, meaning that ordinary examples are not considered scarce simply because they carry the 1969 date. This is especially important when evaluating a circulated coin. Circulation creates scratches, contact marks, surface wear and loss of original mint luster, all of which normally reduce collector value compared with sharply preserved examples. Nevertheless, circulated coins can still have strong collector appeal because they are genuine survivors from the beginning of Britain's decimalisation era. Collectors building complete date runs, early decimal collections or Queen Elizabeth II collections may specifically want a 1969 example. The historical significance of being the first 50p issued for UK circulation gives it a special position even though the overall mintage was high. So, rather than calling every 1969 coin extremely rare, it is more accurate to describe it as a historically important and highly collectible early 50p. Let's move to the part that everyone wants to hear about the value. For a normal circulated 1969 50 new pence, today's market should be approached realistically. A 2026 valuation guide from Cavalier Coins places heavily worn examples around face value and circulated examples roughly around 50 pence to £1 of 50 pence, while better preserved examples can move higher. Converted approximately into US dollars, that puts an ordinary circulated coin in the neighborhood of 65 cents to $2, depending on exchange rates, buyer interest, and condition. This is a general market estimate rather than a guaranteed auction price. At the other end of the spectrum, certified high-grade examples can bring substantially more. PCGS records an auction result of $100 for a PCGS MS65 example, showing how dramatically condition and professional grading can change the market. However, it is very important not to confuse that high-grade auction record with the value of a normal circulated coin. If your 1969 50p has visible wear from years of use, it should not automatically be valued at $100. The real value of a circulated specimen is generally much lower, while exceptional mint state examples, varieties, or genuine mint errors can attract stronger collector attention. If you have a 1969 50 new pence in your collection, the first thing you should do is examine it carefully without cleaning it. Look at the date, the Queen's portrait, Britannia, the denomination, and the overall shape of the coin. Pay particular attention to unusual features that might indicate a genuine minting error or variety. Avoid aggressive polishing, rubbing, or chemical cleaning because these actions can permanently damage the original surface and may reduce collector appeal. Instead, handle the coin by its edges and store it somewhere dry and protected. It is also wise to compare your coin with reliable references and, when considering a valuable sale, look at actual completed auction results rather than simply advertised asking prices. A seller can list an ordinary coin for hundreds or thousands of dollars, but an asking price is not proof that a buyer has actually paid that amount. For a circulated 1969 piece, its greatest strength is its history. This is the first UK 50p issue, introduced before decimalisation. Next up, the United Kingdom 50 new pence coin dated 1980, especially one found in rusty or heavily worn condition. At first glance, a rusty old 50p coin might not look particularly valuable, but coins from the early years of British decimalisation can be fascinating to collectors because they represent an important period in the history of UK coinage. The large seven-sided 50p was introduced in 1969 and became one of Britain's most recognisable coins. The 1980 issue belongs to this original large-size series, which was eventually replaced by a smaller 50p in the 1990s. The Royal Mint describes the original 50p as the world's first seven-sided coin of its kind, making its shape one of its most distinctive characteristics. The 50p coin was introduced as part of Britain's decimalisation programme and was designed to replace the old 10-shilling note. The first 50p coins entered circulation in 1969, several years before decimal currency officially arrived in 1971. The unusual seven-sided shape was carefully developed so that the coin could be recognized easily by touch and sight and could also work effectively with vending machines. The 1980 version continued the classic design featuring Britannia seated beside a lion, holding a trident and olive branch, with a shield beside her. The denomination appears as 50 below Britannia, while the inscription New Pence appears above. According to the Royal Mint, this Britannia design was used on the large 50p from 1969 through 1982 and was designed by Christopher Ironside. One of the most exciting things about a 1980 50 new pence is its classic appearance. The large seven-sided format immediately separates it from the smaller modern 50p coins that collectors are familiar with today. On the obverse is the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II created by Arnold Machin, whose portrait appeared on UK decimal coinage from 1968 until 1984. On the reverse, Britannia provides the unmistakable symbol of Britain, seated with her shield, trident, and olive branch. The combination of the large heptagonal shape, the historic Britannia design, and the early Queen Elizabeth II portrait makes this coin an attractive addition to collections focused on British decimal history. Now let's talk about the most important part: rarity. A 1980 50 new pence should not automatically be described as an extremely rare or exceptionally valuable coin simply because it is old. Collectors normally consider factors such as mintage, condition, varieties, errors, provenance, and actual completed sales when determining value. The Royal Mint maintains official mintage information for UK 50p coins, and the 1980 coin is part of the regular Britannia 50p series rather than one of the famous low-mintage commemorative issues such as the 2009 Kew Gardens 50p. The rusty condition is also extremely important. Surface rust, dark staining, corrosion, scratches or heavy environmental damage generally reduce the appeal of a normal circulated coin. However, that does not mean the coin has no collector interest. A collector interested in completing a year-by-year set of the large-size Britannia 50p series may still want a 1980 example, particularly if the date is clear and the major design details remain visible. In other words, the historical importance of the coin can remain interesting even when the physical condition is far from perfect. The key is to distinguish collector interest from claims that every old 50p is worth hundreds or thousands of dollars. So, what could a rusty 1980 50 new pence actually be worth? For an ordinary circulated example with noticeable rust or corrosion and no unusual minting error, the realistic collector value is generally modest. Depending on the exact condition, eye appeal, demand and selling venue, a heavily worn or damaged example may trade around its low face value equivalent or only for a small premium among collectors. In dollar terms, think approximately 70 cents to $2 for a typical rusty circulated example, with unusually attractive or collectible examples potentially bringing more. These are broad estimates rather than a guaranteed auction price. The important point is that online sellers can list ordinary coins for extremely high prices, but an asking price is not the same thing as a confirmed sale. Serious collectors should pay attention to completed or sold auction results when researching a coin's market value. A normal rusty 1980 50p should not be presented as a guaranteed multi-$1,000 or million-dollar coin. Its real appeal comes from its history, classic design, and place in the early era of British decimalization. If an example has a genuine minting error, an unusual variety or exceptionally preserved surfaces, its value could be assessed separately. If you have a 1980 50 new pence at home, the first thing you should do is examine it carefully under good lighting. Check the date, the Queen's portrait, Britannia's details, and the lettering around the coin. Look closely at the edges as well, because unusual characteristics can sometimes be important. If the coin is rusty, avoid aggressively polishing or scraping it. Cleaning can permanently damage the original surfaces and may make the coin less desirable to collectors. Instead, preserve it as you found it and, if you believe there is something unusual about the coin, consider having it examined by an experienced numismatist or reputable coin dealer. It is also worth comparing your coin with other examples of the large 50p series from the late 1960s, 1970s, and early 1980s. Building a date collection can be a rewarding way to understand Britain's transition into decimal currency. The Royal Mint's historical information confirms that the large original 50p remained in use until the smaller version was introduced in 1997, and the older large coins were eventually demonetized in 1998. In conclusion, the 1980 United Kingdom 50 new pence is a fascinating piece of British decimal history, especially because it belongs to the original large 7-sided 50p series. A rusty example is unlikely to be a huge money rarity simply because of its age, but it can still be an enjoyable and historically meaningful coin for collectors. Its classic Britannia reverse, Arnold Machin portrait and distinctive heptagonal shape give it plenty of character, while its place in the early decades of decimal British coinage makes it worth examining rather than immediately spending or discarding. Next up, the United Kingdom 1979 50 new pence coin in fine condition. At first glance, this large classic 50p may look like an ordinary old circulation coin, but for collectors, coins from the early decimal era can be especially interesting because they represent an important period in British monetary history. The 1979 50 new pence carries the famous Britannia design and the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, making it a recognizable and historically important part of the UK's decimal coinage. So, if you have a 1979 50 new pence sitting in an old collection, box, drawer, or family coin jar, stay with us as we explore its history, design, rarity, collector demand, and realistic market value in US dollars. The 50 new pence was introduced as part of Britain's transition into decimal currency, with the 50p denomination first appearing in 1969. The coin was designed as a large 7-sided piece, making it easy to distinguish by touch as well as appearance. By 1979, the 50 new pence had already become an established part of everyday British commerce. The 1979 issue was struck in copper-nickel and featured the traditional Britannia reverse, while the obverse carried Queen Elizabeth II portrait. Published references record a regular strike mintage of approximately 58.68 million pieces, with another source giving 58.761 million, so collectors will sometimes encounter slightly different published mintage figures depending on the reference used. This relatively large production means that the normal 1979 circulation coin should not be described as an ultra-rare 50p. However, Its age, historical importance, attractive traditional design, and availability in higher grades continue to give it a place in British coin collections. One of the most attractive features of the 1979 50 new pence is its classic Britannia reverse. Britannia is one of Britain's most recognisable national symbols, traditionally shown seated with a shield and trident. The large seven-sided shape also makes this coin instantly recognisable among British decimal issues. The regular 1979 coin was made from copper nickel, weighs about 13.5 grams, measures approximately 30 millimeters across, and has a smooth edge. On the obverse, collectors will find the Queen Elizabeth II portrait used during this period together with the denomination and date. These details are important when identifying an example and can also help collectors compare different issues from the same era. For a coin that circulated heavily decades ago, finding an example with clear lettering, strong Britannia details, and attractive original surfaces can make it much more desirable than a heavily worn specimen. Now let's talk about rarity, because this is where collectors need to be careful. A 1979 50 new pence in ordinary fine or circulated condition is generally not considered a major rarity because millions were produced. Current price references indicate that circulated examples are commonly close to face value, while better uncirculated pieces can command a modest premium. One current guide lists approximately £2, or around $2.50 to $3 depending on exchange rates, for an MS-63 example, while a brilliant uncirculated example is listed around £3 by another specialist guide. That means a normal fine condition coin should not realistically be promoted as a coin worth thousands or millions of dollars. Its true collectible interest comes from its age, design, historical significance, and condition. If the coin has genuine mint errors, an unusual striking characteristic, exceptional preservation, or comes from a recognized proof issue, the situation can be very different. Collectors should always separate ordinary examples from genuine varieties and errors because rarity is one of the biggest factors that can transform a common coin into a highly collectible one. So, what could your 1979 50 new pence actually be worth today? For a normal fine condition circulated example, the market value is generally modest and may be around face value to a few US dollars, depending on eye appeal, demand, and the buyer. Current guides show ordinary circulated examples as generally close to face value, while higher grade examples can reach several dollars. A published guide gives an uncirculated MS-63 value of about $3.80, while another source lists brilliant uncirculated examples around £3. Certified proof examples are a separate category and can be considerably more interesting. PCGS currently records an auction result of $39 for a certified PR67 1979 proof example, although that is not representative of an ordinary circulated coin. Therefore, if you are evaluating a fine condition 1979 50 new pence, a realistic expectation is usually a small premium rather than a spectacular auction fortune. The exact value depends heavily on grade, originality, certification, variety, and whether the coin possesses a genuine error or other exceptional characteristic. If you own one of these coins, the first thing to do is examine it carefully under good lighting. Look at the date, Queen Elizabeth II portrait, Britannia design, lettering, edge, and overall surfaces. Avoid aggressive cleaning because polishing or scratching an old coin can reduce its collector appeal. Instead, keep the coin in a protective holder and handle it by the edges whenever possible. If you believe your 1979 50 new pence has an unusual minting error, compare it with reliable references and seek an experienced numismatist's opinion before assuming it is rare. Collectors should also compare completed sales rather than relying only on online asking prices. A seller may list an ordinary coin for a very high amount, but an asking price does not prove that buyers are actually paying that amount. The strongest evidence comes from genuine completed transactions, established auction records, and recognized grading services. Preserved, proof, certified, or genuinely error variety examples can attract stronger collector interest. So before spending or selling an old 1979 50 new pence, take a second look. You may not be holding $1 million coin, but you are holding a fascinating piece of British monetary history that deserves a place in a serious collection. If you enjoyed this coin value guide, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and keep checking your old coins because the next interesting discovery could already be sitting in your collection.